InsightAI, powered by InsightJam.
Hey, it's Doug Atkinson, and we're back with another episode of InsightAI with our favorite Doug Shannon. Doug, thanks for being back with us.
Good, thanks for having me.
Let's talk Chat GPT-5, as we must, because it just hit the scene. And it's a very interesting new development in that it's really starting to think. I have it open right now, actually. I've been using it all day, as I have been using most of these models. And the dirty secret about the way I use them is I use them against one another or with one another in concert with one another. I'll take a response here and port it to another and say, critique, review, improve. So I've got, we've got GPT, we've got Claude, we've got Gemini, we've got Grok, we don't use the llama all that much. But so the interesting thing about ChatGPT-5 as I was looking at it and am currently using the thinking version. So there's effectively 4 kind of iterations of it. There's fast, which is instant answers, thinking, which thinks longer for better answers, and then pro, research grade intelligence. And then there's this trick that it has, which is the 4th mode, which is the default mode, which is auto. And auto is where I think this thing starts to separate itself, because it's starting to make decisions on its own, if you will, as to how to leverage itself against whatever query it's been given and whatever chat it's in the process of sorting out. You can obviously tee that up to be thinking, which I did, because I don't want you. I'm not ready for you to make decisions yet. I'll tell you what I want from you, but it's fascinating. And so, what's your take on this? I mean, this is where we're headed, right? This is the idea of foundational versus world versus the whole different chain of thought around how it begins to engage. Is that your understanding?
Yeah, I mean, first about the thinking part, right? It's most people were describing it as like routing. So it's routing intelligence, right? It's routing what tries to give reasoning now, which is very, very interesting with this model. And this is why we don't come out right when this stuff comes out and go, this is the news. We wait a little bit, let's ingest it, let's play with it, let's understand it, and see how this routes intelligence, how this is routing different prompts or different understandings or different things that we're putting into it. How is it coding better? What is it doing? Sure, let's look at the mapping, the charting, and what tests did it pass. But really, I think the crux of this episode and what we're talking about here is the fact that GPT-5 is looking to be the last known good or last known foundational model. And like, what do I mean by that, right? Like, I mean, we've been moving up to these foundational models, and as the quick way to look at this is like, how did you feel and how did people feel using this when we got 4.0? How did they feel about that? And it wasn't quite there, but now that it has a simulated reasoning, when you're typing and you're saying, let's do some code, and it's literally there showing you to the side what it's thinking, like what it's kind of relaying and why it's coming up with those solutions, or why it decided to go to Python or go to C versus that because of the ask that you gave to it and what it routed to. That's reasoning. And that's the first time we've ever seen it at that level. And so there is that chain of thought that we got with Strawberry 01 or Q Star, back when we talked about this back in September of last year. And so now we're saying like that reasoning has come full fold. And now this is foundational reasoning. And now where do we go from there? And to your tee up is the fact that we are going to be moving now to world models and no longer really looking at foundational models, because we hit that precipice. The movement and the scale of how that gets better is not going to get much better than it is right now. Now we need to go to the more simulated world, the more understanding and driven world of world models.
Yeah. So I'm sure I did a very poor job of teeing this up, but let's take a step back real quick with regard to definitions and model types. So obviously everything is a large language model. And so explain it. So the first iterations of all these things have been foundational models, essentially starting from scratch, if you will. And
yeah. So maybe I'll give it, so foundational model, what is it, right? It's predictive text, it's statistical pattern matching, it's understanding general purpose knowledge, it's training, It's trained on, fine-tuned. It's passive response and prompts. It is core knowledge, essentially. It is, it's almost like it has its own internal rank, has its own, it knows where it's pulling, it's vetted the sources, it has like thinking, it has chain of thought. So whatever you put into it, this is where like people say, oh, you still need to learn how to prompt. Yes and no. There's the school class is out on that. And it's yes, developers, yes, highly individuals that are driving these things will know how to prompt to understand how to make it do different things. Like when you say, do a statistical analysis or do like simulate this or drive it deeper or have some deep thoughts. Those can be like prompting words to get it to do more. Yet at the same time, it's a matter of understanding how to talk to it, how to ask. Really, at the end of the day, what chain of thought's providing us is, if I ask a question, it's how would I ask another human or another person, another thing that's to do these tasks? How do I get that in order in my own thought so I can actually say, this is my ask, my demand, my pain point. Let's leverage that and actually go drive it forward. The other side of that is where we now have like, we saw with 4.0 and we saw with the reasoning like 03 and 01, the 03 was really good at this of saying, well, what's the chain of custody? Where did you find that knowledge? What site did you go to pull that information? And having that in there is like, okay, great. Now I can talk to it and it can help me understand, did I ask the right question or did I prompt it correctly? Or I can ask it, can you help me prompt it better? Great. Chain of thought. Chain of custody, is the fact that knowing where it got it and looking at that source and going, oh, I see exactly where that got it. But then we were always missing that reasoning side of, why did you come up to this conclusion? Where did this come from? Is it because you know my history? Is it because I said this thing way back when? What does that look like? And so, but now that reasoning's here, it's actually reasoning and routing that intelligence, like you said, to say, well, do you need this or is it this? And it thinks about it to actually kind of prompt itself. Am I grabbing the right stuff? Or do I need to go validate with the human to gain context to know what's next? And so that's the trifecta, right? It's chain of thought, chain of reasoning, chain of custody. Now we can actually learn from this. We're starting to answer what 42 means, from Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Once we understand reasoning, the AI then to provide the why behind what it thought and what it came up with on what it defined on that statistical pattern matching and that overall like predicting of text.
Well, and again, my primitive brain hears these terms of foundational model, world model. It sounds like foundational model is, just some data, and world model sounds like it's all the world data. But that's not really what's happening here. What foundational model is like you said, it's kind of basic neural network behavior, whereas world model is starting to layer in this kind of almost physical, if you will, physical layer of thinking in terms of how things relate within the world, of around us, within the
Right.
as a human would think, spatially. And so it's not a question of data, right? These models it's not a question of the data. That's not why they're different. It's a question of the way they're
Context.
contextually correct and contextually thinking about the answer.
Right. So we describe foundational. So world model essentially is like a representation of like basically take a foundational model and then represent that and do it in real time simulation. And then you take that instead of, just pattern recognition and just understanding of text, and you say, okay, it's contextual situational awareness. So instead of the human providing a lot of the context, it understands the context now, and it can build those situational awareness to really drive that forward. And then there's the aspect of like, it has environments it can create, environmental feedback of those things it can create. It's overall, it can activate, it can take action, right? It can plan, it can adapt, and overall. But the main thing is, and we'll roll that back here in a little bit, but in general, world models are that adaptable, foundational, future solving, not just multimodal, but multi-component, because it can take action on those components. It actually has, like, now we have the legs and the hands, and we can actually take some movements and really move things forward to not just enable people to do more, but to also empower them, because it's now more on that collaborator that we've been kind of waiting for.
Right. So this is where the agents start to show up, right? The agents have been, again, I was talking to somebody yesterday about this very thing, about how we hear Salesforce has got Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey telling me all about how agents are gonna call an HVAC guy to fix the air conditioning in the house, and it's like, or all these other things, to get a reservation, or predict the weather, or whatever those two are doing.
Yeah.
And truth of the matter is that we've been using Salesforce forever, and I don't see any of that. How you use an agent force. But I appreciate the story, and the story is, I'm sure there's something to this story, but
Yeah.
I keep telling people the agents are coming. They're definitely coming. There's too much money been invested in the agents to not arrive with major impact. However, it feels like maybe the models haven't been ready yet, that maybe the development of this world model behavior needs to mature enough so the agents have an ability to behave truly like an agent, rather than just this collaborator that we use right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed information that's coming out from many different sources, and that's why people are kind of lost in the mix. That's why leaders don't know how to move and shake, because they're like, well, what's the best business practice? What is the norm here? And no one really has that built in. There's some companies that are really driving this very well, and those can be talked about at a different time. But then the marketing of Salesforce, like you mentioned, is key in their aspect, because they're trying to show the art of the possible. So this is where we can get to, if your data, if your systems, if it's data filtered, if you have data categorization, if these things fit, well, yeah, it makes sense. But when your back office doesn't have that, because it's all unstructured data, how do you get that structured? And that's a classic AI issue before even Gen AI. And so Gen AI is now, with these agents, people are trying to look at, well, how do I bring an agent into an enterprise that can categorize that? How can I, having this agent filter it, having this agent then take that information and categorize it, and then actually take action? Yet at the same time, we're talking about ChatGPT 5 here, and it's starting to look at taking action using things like cursor and browser-based, action making things, and or even like involving large action models to kind of like field those hands and those fingers and whatnot to actually do more. The issue is, and what we hear and what I hear all the time in the enterprise space, is enterprises don't know how to drive this, because they're like, well, I don't want to give all my data to OpenAI, to Gemini, to Google, to and Amazon and everybody else. So how do I secure that data? How do I drive that forward? And there's not a lot of answers. That's why there's a lot of ambiguity. So they're like, well, we're not going to go look to make orders and find the HVAC guy inside the company. But what if we could, again, define our information, drill down in that, and really push that forward? And so use cases aren't always the best to look at, but they are the easiest point that we're all used to looking for. And that's something to really understand, is if you're always looking for something, maybe you shouldn't be. Maybe you should be looking at, like, let's just involve it, but not just look for agentic, but look at that multi-agent systems, look for those enterprise agents. How are we driving this forward so that everybody's communicating and that culture change happens?
Again, this feels like moving from foundational to world models feels like one of those incremental steps that we all just kind of blow through, that is actually worth noting, because once we're beyond the idea that this is making decisions on its own, if allowed to, right? So you can still dial it in and say, I don't want you to make this decision on your own. I want you to use thinking, or I want you to use, full pro research. But if you leave it toggled to auto, which is what is the default, it does start to make decisions on what it needs to do independent of your prompting in order to deliver the fastest, best possible answer. So, and again, that feels to me like where we're crossing over to a new paradigm where now we truly have not generative AI, but somewhat autonomous AI.
Yeah. And so, and the reason why too is we have to move away from, which, we hit the foundational cap because the scaling laws have diminishing returns right now. And so if we keep on saying, well, maybe when ChatGPT 6 comes out, it's going to be a new foundational, it's not. Like, this is the last one. The next one will be a world model, because, and the reason why is because not just the fact that they have to move forward because of the scaling laws, but they have to move forward because they've already, OpenAI has proven that they can do this. And that's where it rolls back to the talk at the beginning when we're talking about Strawberry 1. and O1 coming out back in September of last year. And really what that reasoning that came in provided. And it just didn't provide reasoning. A lot of the mass majority of people out there go, oh, it can reason now. That's great. But they didn't really see the modularity of it. And that's really the crux of where this really gets very interesting, because when they showed that and they showed the modularity, nobody paid attention, because they literally they said, okay, we have O1 that came out. And then they said, well, let's go back to GPT-4 and let's add multimodality to it. Nobody noticed, because right after that, they said, well, 4.0 comes out and that's the Omni model. It does it all anyway. And it does a little bit better and has also reason built into it. So we kind of missed it. And those that weren't watching were like, oh, it's this just 4.0. But no, we really would go like, hold on, you just modularized the fact that you can add multimodality, or the fact that you can add reasoning to a different model. So if you could build those separately, and scaling laws are kind of hitting those marks, but if you can build it in a modular way, who's to say you can't build GPT-6 and have it out before the end of this year? Who's to say that world model can't be done much faster than what we predict? And so are we going to see it this year, or are we going to see it next year? I think hands down, we're seeing speed be commoditized and be brought in very quickly. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a model drop every like two times a year. And that's what.
Well, so let's take a break, and we'll get into, in our second segment here, we'll get into what makes GPT-5 unique and faster potentially, and also where we see other things going as well. So we'll be right back.
Unlock better leads through Solutions Review events.
Welcome to Data Demo Day. Expert Roundtable, Solution Spotlight featuring Monte Carlo, Cohesity, Denodo, Cloudflare, High Gear, Broadcom, Next Things.
Boost your brand with a webinar that shares comprehensive use cases, real-time product demos, and an interactive Q&A. All broadcast live to LinkedIn, YouTube, and Zoom from our Boston studio, or even on location. Fill your sales funnel with high-quality targeted leads, and contact us today by visiting solutionsreview.com/virtual events.
We're back, and we're talking ChatGPT-5 and all the things that make it kind of new and sort of one-off. And one of those things is this concept of routing that I was trying to get to, with this idea of auto being defaulted and it deciding for itself. But talk a little bit about the functionality there. So it's called routing, which again is a term being kind of reused that may have head trash definitions. I know it does for me, but talk a little bit about how that's being employed in ChatGPT-5.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that one thing that came up in the news cycle, right, and overall when GPT-5 came out, it was, hey, GPT-5's out, and now you don't have access to any of the other models. Like 4.0 went away, you're just on 5. And it's interesting because even when it first came out, and people are testing it, they're like, what model are you on? And it's like, oh, I'm on 4.0, or I'm on 4, or I'm on mini. And so it's, instead of you choosing the intelligence you wanted for your goal, or what you were asking, or what you were driving to, it's choosing the intelligence for you.
And so the cynic in me says, is it doing that because it's saving compute? that it's kind of protecting itself from being whatever, as we all would do if we had ultimate access. We'll just take the most powerful version and throw that at the simplest question because we can.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it in multiple different ways. I mean, even in enterprises that I've talked to and whatnot, they may have different models that they have available, and they may choose lower models to save money. And in the same way, maybe OpenAI in their platform that they have on their phones and everything else, maybe they choose to go, well, if it's a simple question, it gets a simple model. But if it's a deeper question, you get a deeper model. And this is where I was mentioning before, is like, you can say things of, how do you say, like, you can prompt it, or you say like, I'm asking this question, but really think hard about this question, or systematically go through this and double check this and that. Or, the more you add to it, do a different camera angle, do it in this way, do it in this light, use this as an example to ground it again, like stuff that we've used in the past. But when you say like, think hard, like it's actually kind of like almost a command, and it does. And the funny thing is, like with GPT-5, it does think. It shows you it's thinking, and you can choose, like, give me the quick answer. And so it already has that kind of ready. So it almost still shows a little bit of that multimodality of, well, the quick answer is probably like for many because it's just quick. And there are those people that are using this that, oh, I just want the quick answer, not the in-depth, really thought out reasoning answer that really took the time to do it. So that's really a fundamental shift in what this looks like, which also talks to foundational models being foundational at large because of these fundamental shifts.
If this thing is our assistant, that, to a certain degree, if you have the ability to tell your assistant to think hard, you're going to always say think hard. If it doesn't cost you any more and you get a better answer, you're always going to ask it to think hard. And you don't want to necessarily, again, humans being humans, and this thing beginning to represent itself in a human behavior.
Right.
And the fact that it just doesn't cost you any more to get it to work harder, we're natural. Yeah, I can see the abuse already kicking in, where we're like, look, man,
there was some thought of
dig deep.
I don't want to say abuse, but there was some thought on the OpenAI side of when they were prompted, they're saying like, hey, here's a graph, right? And we didn't know, but as soon as GPT-5 came out, they're like, wow, everyone's using reasoning way more than they ever have. Well, now reasoning's part of it.
Yeah.
And are you not just like putting everybody through there? You're routing this, like, of course they're doing more reasoning. So there is that side of it to go like, are they pushing this or are they using it as a test? Because now they can choose, if they can route, but maybe they're saying do a lot more reasoning because we really want to test this out. We want to kind of like red team this in a very live way because they've already done it in the labs and everything behind the scenes. And depending on where they're at there, I would, if I was them. So if I would do it, if I would say, hey, we're going to do a lot of reasoning because we're checking this out. We're seeing how people validate with this. Are they okay with it thinking this long? What do we have? And then looking at the responses, there's some wins.
Again, I've been having a blast working with generative AI. As I said, we use several different models. We use it for all kinds of things. We're using it to think about questions to ask, in video events that we have. We're thinking about using it for, we use it for, straight up program ideation and other sorts of contracts and any number of things. It's amazingly powerful, and it's, once you get into the rhythm of it and start to really work with it, you kind of wait for it to just tap out. you just go as far as you can go, and then it finally just raises its hand and is like, "This."
Yeah, you're not getting any value.
This string is too long.
Yeah, I'll do the human side now because I'll do the homework because it tapped out, right? So, and that can happen. I know I've had some conversation with them like, you don't know what I'm talking about, and so it'll get to a point like, okay, I'll have to go do it the old-fashioned way because it can't reason, it can't get to the point where I needed to get to, and so that's where humans still win, right? Even though that I think it was like even some of the other models, like it's like Grok 4 is still saying that they're the only ones that are able to really beat out like humanity's last exam. So you have like those charts and whatnot of who's doing what, but in regards to that, like still GPT-5. It's a really great coder. And that's the thing. It's like we can all pretend, and if it makes us all feel good, we can all pretend that humans are still somewhat better in some way, shape, or form. But when you're trying to get a lot of disparate ideas to synthesize into a singular concept that you're trying to get to, and you're saying, I want you to look at these things and bring them together, it has perfect fidelity. Like no human or team of humans has that perfect fidelity where it's like, I can access this thing for this answer perfectly. I know exactly what it says. I don't forget anything. Whereas a consultant or an analyst or some other staff person or even team of people would have this typical human sense that there was, if I remember this thing I read 6 months, 2 years, whatever it was, and you're trying to conjure that might fit, but you just don't have the perfect fidelity and the bandwidth clearly to power through
the keywords and recognize it as, no, that is going to work here. And I'm going to pour that in and I'm going to explain it and source it and boom, boom, boom. Let alone the fact that it does it instantaneously for all intents and purposes for free. I mean, there's just no competition. This is not a competition between humans and this thing anymore. There's no competition here. It's a completely different kettle of fish. And humans are going to have to wake up at some point and recognize, at least some humans, that they won't be able to compete with this.
Yeah, you have to realize that. Something you were saying there though is that it was in regards to, actually I forget where that part, but in general, so intelligence.
Perfect fidelity.
Well, the fidelity, yeah, it's more perfect than even us sometimes, right? And so that's the winning side, and we see that with some of these groups, like I was just in the news, like Gartner and some of these other groups may be losing grounding because they may be losing footing because their stock is showing that with intelligence coming out in this pathway and what this looks like, do we need that?
How do they not? How does Gartner? I think about it a lot. Gartner has been the singular beacon of enterprise tech analytics or analysis or however you want to look at it, forever. Right. And everybody else is kind of way second. It's not even close. And when you look at just, raw, revenue and reach and so forth.
Intellectual power, but like when intellect and intelligence.
Their singular value prop was you don't have time to learn everything we know. And we have this team of people who have gone out and are constantly talking to every solution provider and bringing all this information in. And we have this, magic quadrant. Literally, it's a magic quadrant that we control and understand. And you pay us because we literally can conjure magic out of our Gartner methodology. Right. There's no way they can survive what's coming because the other thing is like all these analysts cost real money. I mean, you want to get an analyst, you cost real money. I think it's fascinating because again, we all think something is permanent right up until it's obliterated. Right. I'm sure everybody thought that the horse and buggy was permanent. Right.
The door you can't open it.
Or that taxis were permanent before Uber, or that, Microsoft, or that I should say Netscape Navigator was permanent until Microsoft decided to embed the browser into Windows. And then that was all she wrote. It's Yahoo before Google. I mean, there's no guarantee Google's going to be a thing. I don't know that search survives this. I don't know, but I'm pretty sure that human consulting and analytics is, at least from a first wave, they're directly in the crosshairs of this.
They're going to massively be impacted. And we're seeing that right now with the not the sales cycle, but in general, like the overall stock price just like going down because people are losing trust and people are losing trust because of intelligence. And that's the key fire. I remember what I was talking about, but it was an example. So I want to give everybody an example because people are trying to figure out how to use this. What is going on? Like we're saying a lot, sometimes people are like, this really high terms, Doug, bring it down a little bit. You and Doug explain it very well, but like, let's explain this. So if you're using Google search, we've all used it. And when you use Google search, and to your point, Doug, you're talking about like, it pulls in the right information, relevant, but that's now. So Google search originally, you're like, I'm searching for an idea. I want to understand the concept. I have like 10 things to look at. And then I finally open them up, like, man, this is really spot on, but it's like 20 years old, or it's 7 years old, or it's 3 years old. Well, the 3 years is more accurate because it's more along the timeline that we're on. But when you use Gen AI, and especially with the reasoning and the aspects that we've all talked about and these foundational aspects of it, I give it, what I want, when I want, what I'm talking about, and it's not going to give me the 20-year-old stuff or the 10-year-old stuff. It may take some information from them to help it, and it may even summarize it to make it more now times. Or it'll give you, hey, here's the last 6 months that you didn't find because I found it in the dredges of wherever. And then maybe 3 years ago, but it even says like, but this one's more relevant. And you're like, that's fantastic. You just saved me a ton of time. So this is exactly why search is going to go away. AI search is coming in because it's not only just giving you what you're looking for, it's giving you that defining measure of what you need.
to relate it to solutions review briefly. So solutions review has played the SEO game. I mean, just like we all did as publishers, we played the SEO game for the past 15 years, 10 years, whatever it is.
Yep.
And the idea is, that you're trying to get to page one with whatever you write. So you're optimizing for what Google wanted you to optimize. We all did.
Right.
We all continue to do it to try to get on page one. And when we saw ChatGPT for the first time 2.5 years ago or whenever it was, we realized, as everybody I think did in publishing, that it was a race to the bottom at this point. We were never going to be able to be defensible, because this thing, when we first saw it, we were like, well, I mean, we'd written and curated 20,000 pieces of content over the past 10 years. This thing can literally write and curate, well, at least write and hope it was indexed, write 10,000 pieces of content, effectively the same content that we had already handwritten in the course of a week. And so our original thought was, well, it's indefensible. We can't possibly defend against this, because the amount of content that's going to come that's going to swamp us will be so intense and overwhelming that we will never be able to get our head above the water of this rising tsunami of words that was going to come into Google. The amazing thing that we saw later is that Google recognized that this tsunami of words could not all be indexed, and you could not try to figure out. You just so it appears, at least what we see in our authority, as our authority continues to go up, and there's a kind of a secret measure of your ability to be indexed and page one presented is your domain authority, and we have an extremely high one. But it continued, and we thought it would just go down because of all this other information. But what Google appears to have done, and I'm speaking speculatively, I have no knowledge of this, but I'm just judging the fact that our thing continues to go up, is they had to go back to who they trusted. Right. All the information that's coming in that clearly is being generated by Gen AI and LLMs had to be discounted. And so it appears anyway to us, because we continue to be able to get on page one overnight, that it went back to its roots and said, you know what, if they were here before this swamp of words, that they get a little bit more of a credibility booster, because, and assuming they're writing the same ideas, we're going to give them the benefit of their kind of grandfathered legacy trust, which is fascinating, because that's not how I saw it going. But the bigger point I wanted to make is that if you look at if you use AI mode in Google when you're typing it in, it counts the number of sources it's looking at transparently. It'll count. I think it goes to 100. Basically, It says, I'm going to take the 100 sources in order to give you the AI mode answer, and you can see the number. It's just literally sources, and it if you dig deep enough, it'll footnote the whole thing. My point is that there is an inordinate value now, and I asked ChatGPT this question. I said, is there an inordinate value to somebody who has domain authority with regard to being ingested into LLMs or presented as LLMs? And it came up with a term that I've, quite frankly, become enamored with. It says it's truth-shaping power. So it called it referred to this as truth-shaping power. If you have a high domain, which we do, if you have a high domain authority, you have truth-shaping power, because you can get your validated information theoretically higher up in that 100, potentially in that 100 source pecking order, to the point where the things that you're saying, the phrases you're using, the terms you're articulating
are known good,
are the terms that will be ultimately presented. And as we transition from search, where it's like, I'll go through all these results and I'll look at what I want to look at, to here's the answer. which is AI mode, right? Here's your answer. And we looked at those 100 results and we made a determination
Of
and eventually,
Sure.
and this is where, sorry for being so long-winded,
No,
but this is
I
where
think
we're
it's
going to end up. We're going to end up in this transitionary time where our behavior changes. We won't want to do all the work anymore. We'll trust the results. We'll see the results. We'll vet the results initially, but they will be right enough that we will start to trust them more and more and more. And eventually our behavior will change to the point where we are no longer clicking on links and we're no longer looking at
we
a
want to be
result.
it. Yeah. It would just
We
be
want the answer.
Yeah.
And we're going to trust the answer because
we're going to push that on.
ultimately the answer will be trustworthy.
Right. And that's the thing is, you're talking through that. It's a fantastic example. I think people should be listening to this because of the fact of driving that is the same thing as like driving authenticity. It's providing integrity. And that's kind of what it seems like Google's looking for is like, are you real people? Are you driving this? Are you putting it back into the space? Are you putting it back in the system and tying in the right people that have authenticity? Because now that's the vetting. Like you have vetted it and you're not then leading your people down the wrong path because AI and Gen AI has a tendency to route intelligence for you. And when it does, are you routing the right intelligence to the people that you're serving? And if you're not, that's a dangerous way to go. And if you are, then what road do you take? Do you take the high road? It's the trolley experiment. Do you take the road that, takes out 5 people, or do you take the road that takes out grandma? Which one do you choose? And so it's choosing the latter, nicer road that's not going to hurt anybody because that's the only way to be the trolley experiment, right? So I think it's a fantastic example. I think it's spot on. I think my question would be, how do individuals like myself, yourself, non-company people, because people that are watching this like, well, okay, the company can do that. Great. That's something they're going to start looking into as well. They're like, how do we get into that? Because that makes sense. But how do I as an individual, and I have some answers here probably as well. Should people be looking at individual level? Should people be saying, how do I fix that? I mean, so if you want to go at that, then I can throw in on that.
Again, what I think is fascinating here is that we are at this precipice. We're at this this kind of moment of and maybe we'll take this into the next segment because I think there's a huge conversation here around trust and how we can trust results, how we can trust models, how we can trust answers. And again, I think that's a conversation not only for people on our side who are getting the results, but I think it's probably a very strong internal conversation at OpenAI and at Google and at every other tech company that is presenting these answers is how do we make sure that when people do double check this, that they do feel trust. So we'll take a break. We'll get back into it when we come back.
Want more Insight Jam? Subscribe to our YouTube channel for shorts, panels, podcasts, and more. In your Shorts feed, enjoy a daily dose of best practices from tech experts and leading solution providers, while long-form panel discussions and keynotes, recorded live every quarter, go deep on important industry topics. And don't miss our collection of regular podcasts, keeping you informed on the latest trends. We're hard at work collecting the best enterprise technology information from around the globe, so subscribe to be notified of our next upload. Now, let's get back to the show.
All right, we're back, and we're talking about, we've gone a little bit upstream in terms of conceptual theory here, but we're talking trust, and I do understand where we are, and I do respect, and again, from my own kind of selfish perspective at Solutions Review, we thought we were going to get obliterated originally from ChatGPT and this massive amount of words that were going to be generated and content, but it in truth, it feels a lot to us anyway, as we've been watching our domain authority continue to go up, that there is a certain amount of emphasis being put on legacy brands that can be trusted, that have been around, that were writing content pre-generative AI, that you can rely on, at least from the technical, or at least from the technology company perspective. And so, and I think it's important to note why, at least I'll speculate why, because at this point, everybody who's presenting these AI solutions have to cross this threshold of trust. right? They need people to trust these answers. So they have to deliver, obviously they're obviously trying to deliver the best possible answer, but in the end, they're not writing them themselves. They're hoping that the inputs are going to generate the best possible answer. And the only way to trust that is to put in the most trusted inputs. And so we're in this really interesting time where you're trying to get human behavior to change. You know, it's very much, it goes back to, again, I'm old. I remember Yahoo before Google, and Yahoo's behavior was, trust us, we've curated everything and you just keep drilling down, and everything was categorized for you. So once you finally click down to the category, it was like, we've already given you it was kind of like an AOL model of like, here's the only things that matter. Don't worry about everything else. It wasn't algorithmic. It wasn't keyword based. I think it was very human curated. Whereas Google came along and blew that thing out of the water because it came up with this algorithm that said, no, we're going to scour every word and we're going to triangulate against keywords, and the algorithm's going to present what we think is relevant. And that used to be actually part of there was a relevance score actually back in the early days, I believe, of the Google results. I don't think that's there anymore. And so, that has been the behavior since, Google really took over back in the late 90s from Yahoo and obliterated that. But now we're at a point where, nothing lasts forever. Search may well be the next thing to transition. And so Google is certainly presenting the transitionable concept of, here's an answer. Here's a prompt. Here's an answer that we think is the answer, and we're going to put it actually above all the search results. So we're starting to get down now to what's called zero click, where people are getting a result that they're comfortable with. It's a good result in their mind, so they're not clicking on anything. And I'm sure Google is learning every moment of every result and all the statistics they're able to gather. But they're trying to get to a point where they can establish trust beyond any question, so that they can transition this to the next iteration of whatever this is, search or I don't know.
But I mean,
vibing.
as search goes on, right? I mean, in the originalities of like the algorithm, for example, right? The issue there was, it was kind of tailoring people's viewpoints. We saw many different ways and many different examples of the algorithm kind of tailoring the information to the person searching. So then it was like, oh, log in. I know more about this person's history, more metadata behind the scenes. How do I provide that back to that person so they get what they want? But then they had to tweak that, because the issue was you're almost feeding that same person, that same entity, their own biased data, like potentially, and that could be bad. And I think that thought right there is why we still currently don't have a model that we use personally. Like, yes, we use GPT personally. I mean, like a model that's like on our phones. Like, why hasn't Apple done anything? Because they probably wanted, from what I've seen, what I've talked about is they should be doing a personalized model. Everybody's phone, you should have your own model that's just yours to do a thing. But the problem is, if it's just you with your thoughts, your introspections, and your, authenticity,
It's going to go off the rails.
It could make you think that you're going off the rails too. The sword cuts both ways. And how do you do that without injecting other outside information? And then is that information going to be the mass media? We've seen how we can't trust that in some regards. So like we have to train people to validate their own sources, validate themselves, and to kind of be their own right models of understanding. Like, this is what I'm coming in with. This is my understandings. I could be wrong, and that's okay. And then kind of moving forward with that. And so I see that as kind of like the mix there. And something else I was writing down when you were talking is like, again, like to the trust level is like, is the zero trust, like the one shot. It's, can we give them that information without causing or pushing them down a certain path or a certain belief or a certain algorithmic, like, but they really need to know this. Like, do I? Or if I came to that conclusion, if I did the research myself, would I have came to a different answer? And understanding that it is tailoring intelligence, it is routing intelligence, it is defining what it should give you, and each model can give you a different thing. Like in the beginning, you were saying like, you'll pit different models against each other. Why? because you get different answers. And sometimes because they either have history and they're like, what kind of Gatorade do you like to drink and what have you? Like, well, I don't want to know that. I want to know what I want to know. Don't use my history. And sometimes that's part of the prompting. Don't pretend you don't even know me. Give me this answer. Right. So there's those aspects.
Well, so I think this is a fascinating moment in time, because I think a lot of people, we heard somebody, one of our head editor, actually, Tim King, wrote a post about the 5 stages of AI grief, and where, it's you're in denial, and then you're in bargaining, and whatever the 5 stage. I don't know them all specifically, but denial, or at least. So I think where we are with some people, and I see this going on a lot, there are a lot of people who are hanging their hat on the mistakes. They're looking for the mistake. You can't trust this thing. It got that wrong. It's like, made this huge mistake. And we actually, it's funny. We built an AI crisis simulator using Claude Opus. Claude Opus wrote almost in a single shot. It was the most impressive thing I've ever seen in my life. I started going down the path with Claude Opus on building a way for people to kind of level set their readiness for AI. And in a back and forth, it suggested to me, how about an AI crisis simulator? I think I suggested, how about a simulator? And it said, how about an AI crisis simulator? And I said, let me have it. And it's one of the coolest things I've ever seen. And it wrote it almost in a single go. Not only the coding of the crisis in
dashboard,
JavaScript and HTML. It was a web, basically a little web app thing. But it also came up with the scenarios and the scoring and a little countdown timer that kind of put pressure on you to answer quickly. It was brilliant. And actually, you can, if you, as a shameless plug, you can find it on Solutions Review right now. But and it's it's like 6 scenarios, each of which creates a crisis, right? One of which is our AI medical recommendation started giving out bad medical advice, and now people are dying, or effectively somewhere along the lines like that.
There should be definitely guardrails in place.
Well, so my where I was trying to get to is that right now I think people recognize kind of in kind of at the core of their being that this thing's going to have a negative impact on the professional prospects of people. And so, and there's a knee-jerk reaction to say, well, look at it. It's not ready. It's screwed up. It totally got that wrong. It's like, you can't trust it. Trust, and try to diminish it, because ultimately it represents a threat in the long term. And so I think we're in this interesting place where the technology providers have to ramp up trust. And there's going to be a negative kind of natural kind of almost AI suspicion that we can't trust it, and we still need humans, and look at all the mistakes it's making. And so where do we go from here? How do we get to a point where we feel like we can trust it? How do we measure that? I don't know. What are your thoughts around the larger concepts here of trust at this point?
The trust is key. And part of that goes back to my kind of what I sit with is, when we're working with AI and we're driving this forward, and on the enterprise side, right? Not just like the GPT-5, not just like the big models that are out there that people use every day, but it's how do we use it on the enterprise? And again, trust is very key on the enterprise, because that attaches to your brand, attaches to who your company is, like what you service, what your market, your vertical. And the issue is you don't want to harm any of that. And so again, trust is key. And so with human in the loop, like as we build these out and as we drive this forward, we're all building in contextual understanding. The human is working through that with the agent, with the AI to say, are we doing this right? But it's as we work through it and as we drive that to completion. Maybe it's use cases, maybe it's a different form of that. And you just bring it in because you got to use it anyway. And you start to feel, how can we trust it here? How can we trust it there? What is the role-based access control for these things? Can we do that at the token level and say, these tokens are only for these agents to do these things? Or are we doing it at the human level and say the human's allowing this because the human is almost giving it its permission to say, go do these things? And so is it at the role level or is it at the access level? And so that's still being defined. And that's really why I think it's the trust layer that agents and enterprises, you don't see that like, we're going forward and we're driving it and this is going to be amazing. We see a lot of like, I don't know, what is this and what is that? And I think there's the risk there and the concern. Besides that, there's the fear that we're working past, because even like the grief and the 5 stages that we talked about like last time and kind of that report, it's the denial, it's the anger, it's the understanding like people are scared and really we need to manage that fear. We need to manage the people and the human emotion to say like, the business and the leadership of the companies need to say, this is our goal. Here's where we're driving this and here's why. So that people feel more comfortable without information, without really knowing, but seeing all this stuff changing around them, everybody gets kind of itchy and goes like, I don't know what's going on. So the better we communicate, the better we build alignment, build clarity, build transparency around what we're doing. That's going to build in trust. And that's what I've talked to a lot too as well. And I think that's the way forward.
I've used a lot of things, aggressively over the past few months, more aggressively than I have in the past. And I'm blown away by it. I am just blown away by the power. And like I said, the pure fidelity of it. It's able to synthesize completely disparate ideas into a singular suggestion, concept, proposal, project idea, or multiple ideas even. Here's 6. Here's 6 more. Give me 6 more. Here's 6 more. I mean, you can't run your gamut, but usually in the first 5 or so, you're thinking, who do I have on my team that could have done that? Like given me that quickly as just something for me to chew on. And again, it's not a question of trust for me anyway. It's a question of, it's almost like digital weed. It's like, give me something to get the mind going. It's like you get this and you think, wow, that's food for thought. Like I can really lean into this kernel that you've provided with me. And so now let me riff off of that. It's like, thank you for that. I mean, the ideation, we all want to have these, let's all have an idea session. Let's all go in and ideate together and
brainstorm now.
Brainstorm up some ideas. And truth of the matter is that most people aren't very good at it. Everybody thinks they're good at it, but most people aren't very good at it. And this thing is incredible at it. Like I've never seen anything like it. It's so good at it because it can synthesize everything, and it already has a model or a paradigm for how to create that synthesis in a way that is a new idea. It does it as kind of almost part of the OS that it's been given.
Yeah, that's a different thought, because people are talking about maybe it's not AGI, maybe it's actually creating a AI OS, right? But in general, to the point of looking at this from a speed and scale and mind mapping and whatnot, those sessions we all used to have, and then we'd have like a brainstorming session, and we'd walk into it. And we're like, okay, that was great ideas. Now then we do some storming, and then some norming, and now some forming. But it's doing it all. Like it's already doing that. And so imagine those, 3-ish meetings, if not more, and how much time you just save by using Gen AI than doing it the old fashioned way. And if you need to share that to somebody, you can basically take, you go through your own mind mapping, your storming, norming, forming, and you say, this is what I got to. I can forward you that whole string and say, throw it in yours and see what you come up with. And then we ragtag at it. So like there's speed and scale happening.
There was I've been in those sessions in many different companies, and the professional moderators or whatever enablers of those things, the people who kind of
facilitators and coordinators.
Facilitators, yeah, thanks. one of the tricks is, there's no bad ideas, and they hand out little foam balls to everybody, and like if anybody throws a negative energy at anybody's idea, foam balls get tossed at them to kind of lighten up at these ideas. There's no bad ideas because you don't want people's feelings hurt, and people do have feelings, and their ideas are these little eggs of preciousness, and even though sometimes they straight up suck. And the beautiful thing, the beautiful thing about working with an LLM is it has no feelings. It doesn't care.
Yell at
you can just tell it straight up. That idea sucks. Let's move on. It's not gonna call in sick tomorrow, or take a late lunch or whatever it is. It's just not. It doesn't care what you think about it. It's like here's 20 more. So
you're not getting erasers tossed at you from the teacher. So
I guess my point is that beyond the trust question, it's like I'm not sitting there looking for it to give me the singular answer for truth. I'm looking at least right now anyway, as I'm using it, I'm looking for it to work with me to come up with some interesting thoughts and ideas and angles of attack on, creating a narrative or creating a new project or a new proposal or a new twist on an old program or whatever it is. And I'm not looking to poke holes in that. Just like I wouldn't with an employee. I'm not trying to do that. I'm looking for fresh concepts, and it is littered with them. And I don't think people appreciate it if you haven't used it. It's littered with them. It's really good at it.
But I mean, back on the trust side of this, right? And kind of what we were talking about with how the internet and how search is now kind of like validating human content, people that can be, authentic, and how to, kind of the question I had before the break is like, how do we show up as humans? And I think we show up kind of like this, like, although people like myself put out content, and although there are massive amount of, synthetic content out there, it's the ones that show up and can talk to that content, the ones that show up and have authenticity, the ones that are there. So I think in the future where we're moving towards, and when we start looking at really what's going on, not only businesses need to have that footprint, need to be able to showcase, this is what we're doing, these are who we are, not just like, this is our brand, this is our motto. That's dead. Like, you can't even do that. Like, that's not enough. You need to say, this is actually the actions we're taking. This is who we're interacting with. Check this out. And here's the words we're using. Here's the ontology, the understandings we're bringing to the table. That's validity. That's authenticity. But as a human on the personal level, you gotta look at it and go like, well, how do I show up? Like, do I show up on Instagram? Do I show up on TikTok? What am I doing to really showcase who I am? What am I professionally? What am I out there doing? What do I want to do? Because when people start looking at jobs and going, hey, what do you want to do? And you don't show up, and you're just like, I kept it all hidden and nobody knows me. You're not doing yourself any favors at this point. And you have to be your own kind of like, work towards your own branding, or at least how you want to be authentic, and say, this is me. This is how I show up. This is who I am. And this is what I do. And if something like the internet or something like somebody puts some AI thing to say, no, that's not what that person is. This is what this person is. You're like, that's not me. Like, that's not I didn't put that out there, and I can prove it because the amount of authenticity that I at least myself, and I see other people doing, that's going to give somebody to go, wait a minute, they were doing this before Gen AI. They were doing this during, they're still authentic. Like, we can vouch for that almost. And so it gives you that a little bit of win there to say, this is where I show up. And so in doing so, there is truth to that, and there is authenticity to that. And at the end of the day, it builds trust.
Well, and there's no question in my mind that minimum scenario is that when this is properly presented as solutionable, that can be implemented into organizations, there are going to be large swaths, and maybe it's not the entire organization, but large swaths of elements within an organization are going to get replaced by agents or whatever the equivalent will be. And so to last point there, and I think we'll wrap it up after this. You do want to differentiate yourself. You do want to rise up out of the pack, and you want to start to build your personal brand. And there is a whole school of thought, and we actually are working with some folks who've written books about it, where you should really be thinking about how do I build my personal brand over and above where I work, over and above what I do, so that I am actually a relevant human being that is valuable in and of themselves rather than what they do in some organization. Because I think if we're being honest, that's going to be a bit of a dicey future prospect for some people. So interesting stuff. Always a pleasure. Sorry if I was a little long-winded in some of these things, but I've been having a blast. I've been having an absolute blast, really digging in and working with these models. Just got my hands on ChatGPT 5 and started playing around with it this week. But that's
what everybody should be doing. Everybody should be using it, trying to see what they can do with it, trying to understand it. If you have questions, reach out to either experts or look online. There's tons of people talking about it. But again, don't always believe everything you hear, but definitely do your own search. Understand that not everything out there is always the truth, but there are sources that are validated sources. And so go to those.
Well, and InsightJam.com has loads and loads of content and experts and all kinds of discussions happening. And obviously, as you have found this video, YouTube, our InsightJam YouTube channel is nearing 1 million subscribers. We've got an absolute all-star lineup of experts. We've done mini jams and panel discussions and everything under the sun, keynotes around agents. And so by all means, browse and click freely around the whole channel. But Doug, thanks again very much for the time. And we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Cheers.
Powered by InsightJam.